Twice Upon a Christmas has to be one of the better Christmas specials and a pretty interesting regeneration story. It's actually, I think, one of the better ones just because of what the focus is at the end of the day. But talking about Christmas specials in Doctor Who, honestly, there's never really a lot of push or effort to sort of really get you invested. And by that, I mean it's Christmas. You don't really have much to do on Christmas Day. It's just you just don't. You spend most of the day opening your presents, talking to family, eating, and by the time Doctor Who would come on, or by the time you're finally ready to sit down and watch TV, there's really next to nothing on. And so he's like, hey, let's watch the Doctor Who Christmas special. And we sort of see that in just how some episodes are. Like, there's Voyage of the Damned, there's the Doctor, the Widow, and the Wardrobe, and on the far side, on what would be more positive, would be Doctor Mysterio and Time of the Doctor. But here, with Twice Upon a Time, I have to say this is one of the better um, Christmas specials, and again, one of a really, really good regeneration story. The idea of just the first Doctor traveling with the 12th Doctor, both who refuse to regenerate, and going on this sort of adventure which helps them come to terms with what they have to do, I think is really great. And this episode actually is really great. Everyone turns out a great performance. It's a bit sad we'll probably not see Pearl Mackie again, although we may specials, whatnot, especially with the precedent that has been established with Testimony, although we'll probably never see Testimony again. But if there was one thing I would say didn't work in this episode, and it's not the appearance of Rusty. I love that Rusty is one of the characters that come back here. I'm glad Me wasn't in this. I'm glad Ashilda didn't come back. But I'm personally glad that someone like Rusty showed up, and he's got this really important sort of contrived role in the story. But the one thing that didn't work for me was the sort of direction they took the first Doctor in. Instead of writing him as how he would appear most of the time, which is a servant of the universe and a gentleman, as said by Doctor Who Revisited, he's more come off as an old man in the 60s. He's written as a product of that era as opposed to a Time Lord. And the reason I say this is because in the story World Enough and Time, the Doctor and Bill talk about Time Lords and primarily the Doctor's history with the Master. And he mentions, oh, Time Lords, we've evolved past these vague concepts of gender and sex. I don't know why you guys take it so seriously. And it's sort of the precedent set that Gallifrey is once again a technological and societally advanced planet for the most part. And the idea that the first Doctor is just sort of old-timey sexist. It's sort of like he doesn't get what he's saying could offend people, or just sort of isn't appropriate for the time period he's in, which is actually weird because the time period he's in, it's totally appropriate because it would... honestly, I'm not sure what the time period is, so let's retract that a bit, but it just sort of felt a bit cringy, like they wrote the first Doctor to be that, oh, don't mind Grandpa, he just don't quite know better, he's from a different time. In his days, colors walked in the back. It's just sort of weird and off-putting because the Doctor is still from Gallifrey, and we hear about how much time has passed for the Doctor, but I don't think a lot of time has passed for Gallifrey and Time Lord Society. Time Lord Society, which is very elitist, but it's elitist on base of class, not on base of something as arbitrary as gender, because when you regenerate, you can be a woman or a man or any color you want. So these sort of things make no sense that you would judge them based on that. Peter Davison made sort of note that Gallifrey might not be so welcome to the idea of change from regeneration because it just sort of seems weird that you would not be what you were. It just sort of seems a bit impractical, which I can sort of see, like you'd have to change your wardrobe drastically to fit your new body. But For the most part, David Bradley's performance was great. I mean, this is a big deal for him because he's only ever played William Hartnell. And what I mean is, he plays an actor playing a role. Now, he's an actor playing a role. It's sort of two different things. Like, David Bradley does not have to be William Hartnell stepping into the role of the Doctor. He can be David Bradley playing the first Doctor. So he can sort of bring his own sort of looks to it. And this isn't the first time the first Doctor's been recast due to William Hartnell's death, sadly. But I think he does it just as good as the original guy. I sort of like how his voice is. It's sometimes a bit hard to look at him and not think Walter Frey, but it sort of helps with the idea that you don't mess with the Doctor. You look at the family of blood, look at the Stark family, it works. But I love the idea of testimony. As a group, the idea that, hey, we collect people for like a couple seconds before their death, collect their memories, put them back. They have no mention or memory of what happened, and they're fine. We have this last testimony of the dead. I kind of wonder what the purpose of it is. Like, what purpose does this serve? Like, they call it like, this is heaven on new earth. I'm like, why though? Why are you doing this? It also feels a bit dangerous in my mind. Just sort of the idea that you have all these memories of the dead. I mean, that's a lot of valuable stuff. Like the secrets, the knowledge, the Doctor alone could turn the universe upside down and inside out with the knowledge he and other Time Lords possibly possess. But going on to the real meat of this episode, like what the episode is, because as we find out, Testimony's not doing anything bad. It's the Doctors coming to terms with the fact they have to regenerate. The first Doctor because he's afraid. And I think that makes a lot of sense from a Time Lord perspective. This is his first regeneration. You've heard about it. You've probably even seen a regeneration. You've read about it. But that's a big difference from experiencing it. And we sort of see this throughout most of Doctor Who, this sort of post-regeneration feeling. The idea that, the fifth Doctor looked so exhausted and out of it when he'd regenerated. The sixth Doctor was kind of nutty his first few minutes after regeneration. The 11th Doctor had trouble moving about, and they had the sort of identity crisis within those first couple of hours after regenerating. They don't quite know who they are. So it makes sense, and when you sort of tie that to the fact that, as we found out in Hellbent, Heaven Sent, that the Doctor tells us that, Time Lords don't like to die alone. I wonder if they don't like to regenerate alone. Just, they'd like to have someone who's used to the concept of regeneration know that I'm not going to be quite in my right frame of mind, just sort of help guide them through it. So the focus here has to be not so much on the 12th Doctor, but on the first Doctor, and finding out that he's afraid, the unknown. And love Bill in this episode. Like, I heart Bill every time I see her on screen, especially with those smiles. But anyway, when she asked, why did you leave, or what were you running to, more specifically, the Doctor gives a very interesting idea that I think is very in line with the first Doctor. And I think the Doctor is, he's trying to figure out why evil always loses. Like, the concept of love, loyalty, trust, constantly being vulnerable is what the good guys are. They'll gladly jump into the fray without a moment's thought, and you'd think that would be what's needed for evil to win. Just sort of preying on that stupidity, that open zero guard approach that good takes, and that's where he's traveling around. And Bill just sort of goes up, you don't know why. Like, I don't think you ever know. Like, she's pointing out that the first Doctor, even that the original Doctor, all the way up to her current Doctor, none of them seem to get it. They see themselves more as just wheels in the machine, just trying to find something out. And the idea that the universe is so seldom a fairy tale that it motivates the Doctor to sort of give fairy tale endings to moments in the universe. I love that. It sort of goes back to that scene in Time of the Doctor when the 11th Doctor's just staying on Trenzalore, and like, he's fighting a war, but at the same time he's fixing toys and telling stories to kids, generations of kids. It just sort of helped sort of shape the kind of person the Doctor is on a more basic level, which I think was sort of the purpose Moffat had intended in Capaldi's first season. Sort of idea that, he's an idiot. He's just a guy going around, helping out when he can, trusty screwdriver in hand. He's just there to help move things along. And here we just sort of amp it up a bit to a bit of a better take on it. Honestly, what I think really helped was the fact that the 12th Doctor here is not overly moping, sort of like how the 10th Doctor complains about regenerating, comparing it to dying, and he's complaining to an old man. I always found it to be like the worst part. Like, it's hard for me to feel sympathy for someone when they're complaining to someone who has it much worse. I mean, no one, Wilfred Mott is not going to get a new body when his body gives out. He's not. If anything, he'll be rushed to a hospital. They'll do the best they can to bring him back, and he'll have to go through all this post-surgery, post-op stuff. It just won't be the same. The Doctor, meanwhile, will get a brand spanking new body. It'll probably be younger. It'll probably have better hair. Probably will have no arthritis. Just be a whole new model. And here he is complaining about that. The 12th Doctor here, his approach to regeneration, more the fact he's tired of constantly doing it, he would like to rest. So it's more interesting because where the 10th Doctor is sort of speaking of the process of regeneration, the fact that everything you are is erased to an extent, and a new person comes up, which isn't technically true from what we've seen. The 12th Doctor here is just sort of tired of constantly going at it. And you realize he is centuries, millennia old. I mean, at some point you would just be tired of living forever, especially when you have the option to not live forever. He would just sort of like to stop losing people. He would like to stop feeling so, I guess, insignificant in the grand scheme of things. It's just, you save the universe and 5 seconds later it's in trouble again. You save someone and 5 seconds later they're in trouble again. It's just, you just feel tired, like, can't someone else do it? And the sort of irony to the Doctor is someone else will do it, but it'll still be him. That's the sort of beauty of it. And I love the Brigadier coming out of this. So for those of you that don't know, you probably have some semblance of it, especially if you're watching New Who and you met Kate Lethbridge Stewart, and she mentions that her father is Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart. This is the Brigadier's, I want to say his great-grandfather, or possibly just his grandfather. I should probably look it up, but I'm not in the mood right now. So the idea that the Doctor's been so intrinsically linked to Kate's family, because the Brigadier, Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart, was the head of UNIT's science department, and he and the Doctor were the best of friends. Like, he was the Doctor's one of his best human friends. I would say, going from a classic Who standpoint, it would be the Brigadier, it would be Jamie McCrimmon, Sarah Jane, and Ace. In no particular order, but those would have to be his 4 best friends in classic Who. Maybe Perry, but everyone loves Perry, and sometimes hates Perry. But it was just sort of nice to see that sort of connection, although I don't think it sort of was necessary. I sort of like the idea that the Doctor and Brigadier just happened to meet, but I do love the fact that they've agreed to look in on this character, on this family. And you kind of wonder if we could get like a series where, a young Kate may be struggling to study one day in her room, or maybe even just having a really bad day, and the Doctor sort of like puts a coffee on her desk, or, puts a blanket over her. Sort of like when the 11th Doctor said, I can help Rose Tyler with her homework, because, she won't recognize him. I think that would have been awesome. Especially because the 10th Doctor could have done it, because as far as we know, the 10th Doctor never met Kate. But, sorry, I was remembering the Black Archive scene in Day of the Doctor, when all 3 of them just look at Clara when she mentions the Black Archive. But what I think really worked about this episode, and I think I've probably said it multiple times, what works about it, because a lot works in this episode. A lot is handled really well, in my opinion, and there are probably going to be some people who disagreed fundamentally with that. It's one thing I've learned about YouTube and YouTube reviews and Doctor Who is that you can have a drastically different opinion, and it'll probably be from someone I really like. Just how I think my life is. I think everything I like, people hate. But I like this sort of attempt to pay tribute to the very beginning because technically we're looking at all 13 incarnations of the Doctor because we have to count everything. We have to count because we have to count the War Doctor who puts it into all 13. This is the actual first regeneration cycle. We have to sort of ignore the Meta Crisis Doctor because we all have to because it was kind of a really stupid thing to do, vanity issues. But this is the end of the first cycle, and I did say originally when we were talking about should the Doctor be female, I would say finish off this first cycle just with a guy. Just do it. Just do it. And just call it a day with that and just sort of open the floodgates responsibly to it. No adding X to the regeneration lineup just because you need X. Quality over quantity, But what I think really didn't work again was the direction for the first Doctor. I felt this episode could have stood to be a bit longer. It just sort of felt like we tried to tie this episode up with a neat little bow, especially with the things we drop. But at the same time, none of these things stay too long. Like the end with Nardole and Clara, the fact they just showed up, it didn't stay too long, which I always think is a bit of a problem when you go farewells, because Doctor Who has rather disingenuous farewells. You're not saying goodbye to the Doctor. You're saying goodbye to an incarnation of the Doctor. Actually, you're saying goodbye to the actor. So with that in mind, it's sort of like, okay, and I'm talking about the end of time. I'm always talking about the end of time when I talk about how a regeneration episode is done kind of wrong. Just looking around sad at people, making them think that you're going to die. Like, oh no, I'm just getting a new face. It was just so bad. This one here, it just sort of tries to wrap itself up in these little bows, and maybe some of them don't have to be wrapped up so well, or some aren't as wrapped up as well as they think. I love the reveal from the testimony about the Doctor of War, and I love that name has somewhat stuck with the Doctor since the Time War. And probably just looking at the Doctor's life as a whole, we saw this in A Good Man Goes to War when someone called him a warrior because his actions have actually made the word Doctor translate to warrior in some cultures. And I love the names they give out, the Imp of the Pandorica, the Shadow of the Valyard. When are we getting the Valyard in this show? Like, I know he was in Trial of a Time Lord, and that was interesting, that was cool, that was too long, and we get him in an audio play, Trial of the Valyard, and there may be some other stuff, but we keep getting like little hints that the Valyard should show up, because the Master said the Valyard will show up or emerge somewhere between your 12th and final incarnation. So he should have shown up by now. Or maybe Chris Chibnall will take up the Valyard. That'd be a really cool enemy for the Doctor to face off against for presumably the third time, and the second time seriously. Coming up, and we're gonna wrap this up here with Jodie. I hate to tell people this, nothing happened. Like, Jodie didn't bring anything to the table, and that's not a fault on Jodie. Like, there was no real acting for Jodie to do other than look like she just exploded and look at her reflection and goes, "Oh, brilliant!" I'm like, okay, didn't do anything. I'm not sure if her pressing the button and the TARDIS exploding is supposed to be a joke about women drivers. I kind of hope it is, just to watch the internet lose its mind. But again, she didn't do anything. This is one of the more do-nothing post-regenerations we've had in New Who, and it's a bit more in line with Classic Who, really. Usually Classic Who just has like, hey, we regenerate, episode's over, and we'll go into the more heavy stuff later. I'm trying to figure out why the Doctor wants to keep turning the TARDIS on and have it travel to regenerate, knowing he's going to explode and the TARDIS is going to crash. Because the 10th Doctor did this before. Actually, the 9th Doctor. Well, the 9th Doctor was leaving a very dangerous area, so that made sense. The 10th Doctor's just sort of moping, going, "I don't want to go!" And he explodes in the TARDIS, and it just starts coming apart. Because, he exploded, and then the 11th Doctor trying to navigate the TARDIS as everything starts going haywire, and he crashes in Amelia Pond's backyard, well, her aunt's backyard, and we have the 12th Doctor's TARDIS crashing in Victorian London in deep breath because the 11th Doctor turned the TARDIS on. Hey, we're traveling. Let's explode. Hey, I don't have a memory of how to fly this thing. Oh, what do you mean we crashed? What are the odds? And even Money says we're going to get a new TARDIS console, which is a bit of a shame. I've liked the past two consoles to the TARDIS. I love the interior of this TARDIS. From season 7, part 2 onward to now, I love this TARDIS. I love how dark and atmospheric it looks, and I love that the first song's like, atmosphere. This is supposed to be a highly advanced spaceship, not some French restaurant. I love that back and forth, the sort of generational gap between the first Doctor's efficiency and the 12th Doctor. Let's have some fun. Let's get a good feel to it. Make it look cool. Customize your desktop when it's not needed. And like real quick, that was something I also liked about the real back and forth between the first and 12th Doctors, just how differently they operate. The 12th Doctor's like, I've got these gadgets to look at things. I've got a sonic screwdriver. I've got these shades. Like, well, the first Doctor's like, did you actually try looking at it? Look at that. There we go. Figured it out. Stop being stupid. It's sort of like when the War Doctor looks at the 11th Doctor like, are you capable of speaking without flapping your hands about? It was just sort of fun, especially when the deleted scene when he keeps talking about how the 10th, 11th Doctors have been bickering and just talking incessantly for days, nonstop. But yeah, we're gonna get a new TARDIS console, a new TARDIS desktop background for Jodie, which is again a bit of a shame, but new take, new twist, new showrunner, everything's coming new here. It's a good, scary feeling. My only request for Jodie's tenure as of right now is don't mention that this Doctor's a girl. Don't. Like when someone says something's new about you, yeah, haircut. And, or like, wait a minute, something's weird here. I am so short. I've always thought that I'd be, if I was a Doctor, like despite every different thing about me compared to the other Doctors, I'm like, I don't think I've ever been this short, and then talk about how cool it is. Because that's what the Doctor does. Every time he regenerates, they're like, oh, this is an improvement. Much more dignified than the other one. The Doctor just totally is in love with himself. And I think that's more of a Time Lord thing, that you quickly adjust to this new body you're in. And you see it as superior to the other one. And I sort of have the idea that the Doctor, and possibly all Time Lords, regenerate to suit a psychological need or a bare minimum need. Like the first Doctor regenerates into a much more active and durable body, which I always felt was a conscious effort on the first Doctor's part. It was a conscious effort on William Hartnell's part. He did suggest Patrick Troughton. But with that in mind, I'm going to bring this video to a close. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you'd like to see Jodie's Doctor go in, how you felt about this episode, and just sort of leave that in the comment section. Feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I will get back to you all later. This is the Bucket Think Tank signing out. May your fandom serve you well.